Hello and welcome to another 088 online training session. It's great to have you with us. Thank you for joining. My name's Edward Smith, product specialist for 088. Today we're going to be taking a look at programming queues onto playbacks. Okay, so we're kind of going through that process of we're going to first of all create some lighting states, but then we're going to go quite in depth into all of the settings that we've got available to us, both in terms of recording single lighting states onto playbacks and then also going in and programming some queue stacks. And then when we've done that, we're going to go into taking a kind of a little bit more of a look in terms of how we can play back our queues live and a little bit of navigating our queue stack, which will then take us to the end of the session. Okay, so let's dive in. What we've got on my screen here, I have got capture visualization software running on the left-hand side. Okay. And I've got Phantom ZerOS running on the right-hand side. Phantom ZerOS being the software that is free to download from the 088 website, which allows you to emulate any of our consoles that run the ZerOS software. So right now I am emulating a Flex console. We've got you can see a preview of Flex front panel there. But everything we go through today, you will be able to follow along if you're on a Flex S or other consoles as well. It might look a little bit different depending on what you're on. But what we're seeing today is if you're on the full-size Flex. But there definitely will be similarities between some of the other ZerOS consoles as well. Great stuff. Any questions at all, please do put them in the comments of the various streams. We're streaming right now to YouTube, Facebook and Twitter, so do please keep your comments coming, and they will come through to me and I'll be able to answer any of those at all. So yeah, do please keep any comments coming. That's not problem. If you are watching this kind of playing back, not live, again, do keep your comments coming as well on these videos, and one of the team will get back to you as soon as possible. Okay then, so I'm going to go in and take my fader down here. I've got a lighting state playing. I'm just going to go in and take that fader down so we can start to build our show up. We can start to do a little bit of programming and start to build those queues up, and then go through some of the options available to us. So I'm going to go and close my external monitor window for now and just go and open my internal touchscreen window. That looks like this. And I'm going to go to my groups. We've covered the groups window in other training sessions, so of course do go check those out. That's not a problem. But groups is kind of a really good starting point to just grab control of some lights, and then we can actually go in and control them. So I'm just going to go through this process. I'm going to go and say, okay, well, I want these fixtures here. So I'm going to go and double click those. Double clicking a group will turn those fixtures on to full. I'm going to go to my colors and I'm going to go and pop those in a color. Go to my positions. What should we go with? I'll put those in a fan position. Again, what we're seeing here, we're now kind of jumping between different programmed palettes. We went through programming palettes in our controlling fixtures session, so do check that one out if you want to know more on palettes. But I can just use them right now as really quick building blocks for my lighting states. I might want to jump back to my groups. I'm going to select those fixtures, but I'm actually going to dive in and say at 30 enter. I'm going to go to my colours. Just going through that process of building our lighting states as we go through. Last one, I'm just going to grab my spot fixtures that are coming in from the side. I'm going to go to beams, pop a gobo in those. Let's go to positions. Put those in a position. That's fine. I've got a lighting state there that I am happy with. Okay. So when you've gone through that process of going in and creating your lighting state, we can then go and save that. We can program that into our console. Now, pretty much all programming on the console follows the same three-step process. Okay, and that is create your lighting state that you wish to store. Then go in and tap your record button and then choose where to store it. It's pretty much always that 3-step process. So now I've got the lighting state that I'm happy with. I'm going to go and tap my record button on the console. And when I do that, I'm just going to go and make my front panel a little bit bigger. The left-hand side of the console is going to be flashing away at me. Okay, there's something already on playback fader number 1, so it's static. Okay, it's that button's static right there, showing me there's something already pre-programmed. But I'm going to go in and I'm going to go and choose an empty playback fader, one of these flashing ones, to store that in. And there we are, simple as that. I've now programmed my lighting state. So let's go and take a look at some of the controls we've got available to us. Okay, I'm going to go and close my internal screen. I'm just going to open my external window. And right now we can see a load of red intensity values in my output window. So top half of my screen here is my output window, and I can see all of these values that I've gone in and adjusted are displayed in red. Now a red intensity value, that colour is indicating the fact that that fixture is being controlled by us. It's being controlled by us as an operator. It's not being controlled from a cue or playback that's on the console. And that's quite important because red values have the highest priority on the console. And so if I were to right now go and try and run back my cues, not a lot's going to be adjusting those intensities because right now the intensities are being controlled by us. Okay, they're what we call programmer values. We would call them, that we would refer to them as values in the programmer. But we have a really helpful clear button that can help us out with that. If I go and tap the clear button once, you'll notice that my orange circle around some of those fixtures have disappeared. That means I now have cleared the selection. Okay, I've now got no lights selected. My console doesn't have any idea what lights I want to control right now. A second tap of clear, that's then going to get rid of any of those red values, and all of the fixtures are going to be sent back to their defaults, or back to whatever lighting states of any cues might have been trying to play in the background. So there we are, we've done a double tap of clear, we've got rid of our manual lighting state now, and so now we are ready to play back our lighting state. So I can make sure that I am on Playback's fader function. Your faders will have two functions, channels function or Playbacks. And in Playbacks, I can now see that I have two of my fader buttons lit, meaning I've now got two lighting states programmed in, the first of which was already programmed. I'm going to go to my faders window here, and I can now see with my on-screen faders, I do have something on fader 1 and fader 2. And if I go in there and push up lighting state number 2 that we've just programmed, our lighting state fades on in. Our lighting state fades in. So what are we seeing happening there? Well, I've got direct intensity control on my fader. And I've got direct fader intensity control right the way down until I pull that fader down. And the next time I raise it again, we do see this fade. We are seeing a fade from both colour and the position of those lights. And what they are doing is they are fading from their defaults. When that fader is down, right now nothing is controlling those lights on my console. So they are having to get from their defaults to the programmed value. And so we're seeing this fade happening. And the reason we're seeing this fade is a 3-second fade, and if you're used to using the console, you will be familiar that that is the default. 3 second for colour, 3 second for position is the default fade time. What we can do though is, of course, we can edit the fades of that cue that we've just gone in and programmed. Okay. To do that, I can press and hold the view button and tap that playbacks button. Okay, press and hold view and tap that playbacks button. And that will open playback 2 in my cue list window. Okay, so I can now see playback 2 in my cue list window. In the little header of the cue list window, I can see what playback I am looking at. And here we are. In here, I can see, there we are. There's my 3-second colour fade and my 3-second position fade. Kind of two ways of editing that. Click on one of those and you can actually use your encoder wheels on the console to adjust the fades. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to double click on here, more like a kind of a spreadsheet, and I can actually just go through here and I'm going to just edit those down to 0 seconds. So I've now got rid of my fades. Let's play that back this time. Let's see if that's a little bit more what we're after. So I'm going to raise my fader this time, and instantly my fixtures, of course, snap. As soon as the fader is raised, instantly those fixtures go to their colours, go to the positions. But again, we are still seeing a little bit of movement there. As soon as we move that fader, again, the fixtures have to still physically get to that programmed location. So we're still seeing a move. Now, in some instances, a move might be what you're after. You might want to see beams flying across your stage when you raise a fader. But if you don't, this could be quite irritating. Okay, so what can we do about that? Well, by default, the button under a playback fader, if you've got a single lighting state programmed on there, the button, as you might be familiar with, is a flash. So if I go and press and hold on that button, that lighting state will instantly output, and when I release my button, that then goes back to not outputting. So I can flash that lighting state. Flashing, of course, really nice when it comes to, in the world of lighting there, to kind of flashing intensities in, or flashing kind of bursts of colour and things like that. But again, when I flash my lighting state right here, I'm still seeing those live moves. So actually I can configure that button function to be something a little bit more useful to me. When it comes to configuring the button function, we can go to the playback settings to go and see those options. To get to the settings of a playback, press and hold the setup button and tap the playbacks button that you wish to go into the settings of. Alternatively, and the method I'm actually going to use today, doesn't really matter which you use, I'm going to go to the faders window, and by default, if you click on an on-screen fader, that also takes you straight to the settings. So I'm going to go and click on Playback 2, and that takes me straight to the playback settings. Okay. Before we do anything else, arguably the most important bit of the faders window here is the fact that you can name your faders. So if I just jump to advanced, I can click on name and I can go and give that a name. And I'm going to give it a very imaginative name of lighting state. But before we jump out of the settings, let's take a look at this button function. So these first 5 buttons along the top of this window, we're going to be diving in and out of this window quite regularly throughout this session. Those kind of different tabs, they're different areas of control we've got available to us. And under general, we can see all of these options here, the bottom row of which being the button function. As we've already mentioned, flash is set by default. Okay. We've also got a little line of text there as well saying hold shift to choose the shifted option for that button. So we're basically saying, okay, well, when the shift key is held and the button is pressed, we can have something else happening. We can have a secondary function. And if I go and hold my shift key on my laptop right now, we can see that solo is chosen. I've got my shift key held down right now, and the console is saying, well, when shift is held, this is going to be the option that happens when that button is pressed. Soloing a playback, a really nice thing that you can do. If you go and solo a playback, any other playbacks will temporarily be taken to 0. Just that lighting state is soloed. And then when you release the button, it resumes your lighting state previously. So by default, shifted button function of a playback with a single cue on it is solo. But we've also got a couple of options in there as well, go fade and go snap. Okay, and they're the options that we're going to take a look at now. Go fade, that means go into that lighting state, output that lighting state using the fade times that are there. Go snap, that means instantly go to that lighting state, irrespective of the fades, instantly go into it. Now, in our case here, we've actually gone in and set the fade to be 0 second. So in this instance here, in my example here, actually go fade and go snap will be doing the same thing. So it doesn't matter which one I choose. So I'm just going to leave it on go snap, and I'm going to click OK. I'm going to go back to my cue list window now, noting that we can now see our name of our playback, which is really helpful. Go back to my cue list window, and I can now tap the button under that fader. And it goes green, meaning it is live. That cue right now is live on stage. But of course our fader is down. So right now it is live on stage, but with no intensity. Meaning as soon as I now go in and raise the intensity over the top, I'm not seeing any colours, any positions, any beams swinging around. All I'm doing is then raising the intensity. So that's kind of, rather than just programming a lighting state on there, maybe changing the fade times, pushing it up and seeing beams swinging around, this kind of allows you to get a little bit more clever and a little bit more, make your lighting states a little bit more polished. If I lower this fader now, lower it down, right the way down, notice my cue row here does go back to yellow. That's now what we call released. Okay, it's released. There are now again no lighting states trying to control those fixtures. So prior to raising that fader, again, go and give its button a tap, and then you can raise the fader. It's just a way of prepping that lighting state before going in and just pushing its fader up. Okay, so that's a really useful tool to be aware of. Let's dive in and take a look at some of the other options within the playback settings. But before we do that, let's program a new lighting state. I'm just going to program a really simple lighting state. This time I'm going to say that I want a lighting state which has, what should we go for, 1 through 10, at. Okay, the shortcut at, that is just a shortcut for at 100 enter. Okay, at full essentially. So here we are, I've just got those fixtures on at full. I'm happy with that. I'm going to go and record that now. So I'm going to go and tap record, and I'm going to go and store that onto playback fader number 5. Okay. And I'm going to just do another lighting state. I'm now going to go in and say at 50 enter, and I'm going to record that onto playback number 6. And again, as you'll be used to doing by now, go and give a double tap of clear to clear selection, clear out your red values. And now we've done that, I now have 2 lighting states here, lighting state here and a lighting state here, both of which trying to control the same fixtures. Both of those lighting states trying to control the same fixtures. So which one is going to win? Okay, and that depends on the various options that are available to us. So let's dive in and take a look at some of those options here. By default, intensity will mix what we call highest takes precedence, HTP. You might have seen that acronym. And that means whatever playback is outputting that has the highest value for a fixture, that's the one that's going to win. So if I go and raise my playback here that has those fixtures at 50%, that right now is the highest value for that light, so it's going to win. But as soon as I start to raise this fader here, I'm going to raise it, nothing's happening, and then when this fader gets to 50%, it wins. It's now taken over. This fader here now has the highest value for those lights. Indeed, this fader here is now not going to be doing a lot. So I've now got control on this fader here. Again, if I then start to lower that, lower, it's then not going to go any lower than this, because that is then the highest value for that light. Okay, so that is the default intensity mixing option, okay, of your playback faders. By default, intensity will mix HTP. But we do have a couple of other options available to us in those playback settings that we took a look at a moment ago. So I'm going to go to my faders window right now, and again I'm going to go into the settings of my playbacks by clicking on it. So I'm going to go into the settings of playback 6, and this time I'm going to change my intensity mixing option, and I'm going to change it to be latest. takes precedence this time. So intensity mixing of playback number 6 is now set to latest. And I'm going to go and click OK. So, same thing again. I've got my lighting state that has those fixtures at 100% here. I've got my lighting state that has those fixtures at 50% here. If they're at 100, as we found before, if I were to raise this playback fader here, before, nothing would happen. Because right now, those fixtures are at their highest value coming from light number 5. Playback number 5, sorry. But as soon as I go in and raise playback 6, it becomes the latest control for that light. Not the highest, the latest. So if I start to raise that, I am raising a fader, but actually lowering the intensity level of those fixtures. And it's just going to keep lowering until it gets to the programmed lighting state on here. That's now the latest, and therefore this fader here, I can lower it. Not a lot's going to happen, because this is then the latest control for those lights. Okay, but again, I've still got control of that one. But it's really useful if you want to just have a lighting state on, and you know, no matter what is on stage right now, you want to raise a fader, and all of the levels will go to how you'd program them in that playback. Set it to LTP. Set it to latest takes precedence, and that way you can raise it and you know those levels are going to get to that lighting state that you programmed. So that is latest takes precedence, another useful option to be aware of. Okay, I'm going to go and change that one back to HTP. And again, something else we saw here, right now this fader here cannot lower those fixtures below 50%, because this fader here is set back to having the intensity mixing of highest takes precedence. That is therefore the highest instruction for those fixtures. But this time I'm going to go into the settings of playback 5, and we'll take a look at the next intensity mixing option, which is LTP catch, what we call LTP catch, latest takes precedence catch. And I'm going to click OK. Again, if we just push those lighting states up on their own, they're going to behave just like normal lighting states. If I raise this fader up so that it's now got those 50%, and I then go and raise my fader here, again, nothing's going to happen until I get to 50, and then it takes control. But it now has what we call caught. It's caught the levels of those lights, which means as I now lower this fader, we now have control. So because I've level matched, because I've brought my level up to the value that those fixtures are at right now, I've then grabbed control of those lights. So I'm now able to lower those lights below the level of the fader. Okay, and again, I could now go in and lower this fader, and I've just still got full control now on my lighting state here. So that's sometimes quite a useful level as well. You can use a playback to grab control of intensity levels coming from other playbacks. You don't even need to know what those other playbacks might be. You might be more familiar with this behaviour in the channel faders, because if I've got my lighting state coming from here and I go to my channel faders, you will probably, if you're used to using the channel faders, you'll be used to the fact that they are by default essentially latest takes precedence catch. The channel faders are by default LTP catch, because I can raise a channel fader up to the level that that light is at. So I'm going to raise this fader to 50%. It will go from blue to red, so it will go from that blue value, meaning it's coming from a queue, blue is coming from a queue, to red, meaning it's then a live value. And then I can use my fader there to take that light out. Okay, again, it's just LTP catch. So you'll be used to this LTP catch behavior from the channel faders. Okay, but that's how we can emulate that behavior using our playback faders as well. Okay, I'm just going to go and chuck that one back to the back to default. Chuck it back to default, and again, I've then got full control. Now, the last intensity mixing option to take a look at let's dive into those settings, and we're going to go and choose Inhibit. So I'm going to go and choose my intensity mixing right now to be Inhibit and click OK. Notice in my faders window, that fader has gone right up to full. It's flown up to full right there. That little level fader on the little white bar on the left hand side, that's your level indicator, and I can see this fader has flown up to full. And that's because right now this is inhibiting the level of the fixtures stored in that playback. So let's dive in and have a look at what that actually means. So I'm going to first of all move this fader up to the level that it's at. And I've now grabbed control, so I'm just going to leave that at full. And again, happy days, I can go and control those fixtures in the usual way. Of course, noting that when the fader is up right now, there is no lighting state up. And that's because this is kind of a little bit like a sub-grandmaster. It's a little bit like a grandmaster, but just for the fixtures that are stored in that playback. That playback is inhibiting, hence the name Inhibit. It is inhibiting the levels of those stored fixtures. So if I were to lower this fader now to 50%-ish, I can now only get anything to 50% of the levels to those lights. So for example, I've got my playback here that we programmed at the kind of start of the session. That is trying to set those fixtures to 100%, but my fader here is inhibiting the levels of those lights. Okay, so it's a really useful tool. An Inhibit fader is a really useful tool. Couple of kind of prime examples of that is sometimes you might find it's easier to just record house lights when you're going through your programming session in kind of theatre world. You might find it's easier to just program house lights into every single cue. Just have your house lights on in every single cue and programmed in. But then get yourself an Inhibit fader of your house lights, and you then know whenever that fader is down, the house lights will not be coming on. Okay, and you can just then raise that fader at any point, and it will allow the lighting state for those lights to then come on. Equally, if I've got in my Inhibit fader down right there, and I go back to channel faders, still not a lot's going to happen. I'm going to get red zeros because right now those levels are getting inhibited at 0%. Okay, but I can go back to my playbacks, raise my Inhibit fader, and those levels can then play underneath. So as I said, the best way I like to look at it is it's kind of like it's a grandmaster, but you can choose which fixtures are being controlled by it. Okay, so that's Inhibit. Okay. Great stuff. So there we have been through. I'm just going to jump back and I'm going to go and put that back to HTP, back to default. So we've gone through there and we've taken a look at all of the various intensity mixing options there available to us. Let's take a look at some other options available to us. So I'm going to go into Playback 5 here. We've spoken about the Go options. We mentioned solo. There's another really nice option in here of Latch. So I'm going to set the button function to be Latch right now and click OK. And now the button underneath that fader is a little bit more like a light switch, really. So I can click that button once and my lighting state will play, click it again, and that lighting state will turn off. Okay, so that's quite a nice one to be aware of. That's the Latch button function. Okay. Again, I'm just going to be chucking these back to their default options when I'm done with them. You don't have to do that, of course, if you don't want to. Next thing we'll take a look at, which is some really useful options available to us, is the raise and lower tab. Okay, the raise and lower tab. First things first, what have we got in here? On the right hand side, we have got some timings. So we can apply a raise time and a lower time to our fader. Okay, now this is different to cue times. That's really important to be aware of. Raise and lower time is the time of the fader itself, not the cue, and there is a difference. So if I go into here to the raise time, while you're in this window, you can also use the first encoder wheel to set that time as well if you wish. And I'm going to go and set that raise time to be 5 seconds. and I'm also going to go in and set the lower time to be 5 seconds. I'm now going to go and click OK. Now the nice thing about this is it means I can go right now and snap that fader up, and that lighting state will fade in. Okay, I can then go and snap that fader down, and that lighting state will fade out. So it's putting a fade time on the fader. Equally, I could go and raise that fader to kind of halfway. The fade time will still go from bottom to halfway, and I could then snap the fader all the way up to full, and I'm then going to get a fade as well from halfway to full. So as you can see, it's putting a fade on the fader itself, not on the cue. There is a subtle difference. Great stuff. So I'm going to let those fade out on that one. Really useful for house lights. Chuck your house lights on a fader and you can just kind of flick that fader up and they're going to then automatically run that fade. I'm going to go and get rid of that raise time and the lower time. Another option that is worth mentioning in here is this one here, trigger and release level. Okay, which at the moment is set to 5%, which is the default. So what do we mean by trigger and release level? Well, if I go, I'm going to make my faders window a little bit bigger. If I go and raise my fader here, nothing is going to happen until I get to 5%. And then those fixtures, that lighting state is going to output. And I now, of course, have control from 5% to 100% of my fader's travel. And that's really useful. It means if you were to nudge a fader, for example, accidentally, you're not going to end up with beams and colours flying all over the place. You've kind of got a little bit of wiggle room, as it were, on the very bottom end of faders. However, what you might find is, depending on what fixtures you have, 5% intensity is actually quite bright. Okay, so you can kind of see Capture emulating this quite well in the visualization software. The difference between that fader being off or down, essentially, to the lowest I can get it of 5% is quite obvious. There's quite a change there. And that's definitely the case for fixtures that might have, for example, maybe not as very good low-end dimming curves. LED kit that doesn't have great low-end dimming. Obviously, if it's a dimmer, you very, very rarely, depending on your dimmer settings, very rarely will you see any light output whatsoever at 5%. And therefore, it's no problem at all. Same with a lot of fixtures with mechanical dimmers in discharge fixtures and things like that. But when you've got LED fixtures that have got quite poor low-end dimming, it's maybe very steppy at the beginning, or very great difference in intensity at the low end, you might find that it's worthwhile going in and lowering that trigger and release level. So if I get a playback 5 again, raise and lower, go to my trigger and release level and set that to be 1% and click OK, I now have right the way full control right from those fixtures right the way down at 1%. Okay, so that might be that's kind of a useful tip to be aware of if you've maybe got some cheaper LED kit that you find, oh well, actually low end they are very bright. Go and lower that trigger and release level, and that will just give you that little bit of extra control, which might help you out. Okay, so that's just another one to be aware of. Couple of other options when it comes to triggering and releasing that we'll just quickly take a look at. If I get a raise and lower, I can disable release on lower if I wish to and click OK. Now on this lighting state here, if you remember, I can push that lighting state in, go to my cues window and it is in green right now. If I lower that fader, it now remains green. So that lighting state right now is still on stage, but just with 0% intensity, which means I can now raise that fader whenever I want, and I'm not going to be seeing beams swinging around because that lighting state is just held in that lighting state from Playback 2. That is also what you can do as well. Same logic. We're going to go into programming cue stacks quite shortly. But same logic applies if you want to be running through your cue stack, and if you're halfway through your cue stack, you might want to lower your fader and then raise the fader again, and you're still in the cue that you're in. If you wish to do that, exactly the same process. Go into your settings, go to raise and lower, and you can go and disable release on lower. Now what that means is when that fader is lowered, the playback is not released. If I were to right now just go in and use a little bit of syntax and say 1 at, notice the colour and the position is still coming from that playback. So if you want to manually release a playback, if you've lowered it and set it to not release automatically, if you want to manually release a playback, press and hold the clear button and then tap the button of the playback you wish to release. So I'm going to press and hold clear right now and tap my playback button there, and that manually releases it. If you want to manually release all playbacks except the master, you can press and hold clear and tap the fader function button, and that will release all playbacks except your master playback fader. Okay, great stuff. So that is your options for raise and lower options in here. Okay. We've had a question from someone on YouTube. Thanks very much for the comment. Let me just have a quick read of this. Is it possible to set a fader raise delay? I think that's supposed to mean a fader raise delay. So you raise the fader, the cue outputs, and after, let's say, 2 seconds, the lights then fade in at the rate the fader was raised. There's no way of putting a delay on the raise time. Okay, the raise time is just the time in seconds. So the way I would do that to kind of achieve what you're after there is I would go into the settings, I would go and view, playback 5, so I'm going to go and view playback 5. And I could then go and click on the uptime, and on my encoder wheels, I can then go and set a delay. So I could go and set a delay of 3 seconds in there if I wanted to, like that. I could go and set a fade as well in there, and click close on that one. And what that would mean is I can then raise my fader, there will be a delay, and then those fixtures will fade. Okay, so there's no way of delaying the fader itself. When you apply a raise or a lower time, you are purely affecting the time of your fader, but that is a way of applying a delay if you wanted to. Okay, we will go more in depth with fade times shortly as well. Okay. Great stuff. So we've taken a look at quite a lot of the options within the playback settings there. We also spoke about naming a playback. If you're on the full size flex, you have a dedicated name button, so you could just literally go and tap the name button and then tap the playbacks button that you want to name. So I'm going to go and click on him, and I can just call that, for example, Downlight, give it a name. And then I can see that name in my faders window. Really useful to label everything up, as I've already said. It means you can just have that faders window open, and whatever page you're on, as you step through your pages, you're going to know what lighting states you've got in front of you to play with. You know what each fader is doing, because you can have it all labelled up in here in your faders window. Okay. So yeah, always label your playback faders. It's a good habit to get into. Okie dokie. Any other questions on what we've done so far? Do please put them in the comments. That would be great. But otherwise, let's go in and take a look a little bit more about programming a cue stack. So what we've done so far is we've been programming single lighting states onto our faders. Single lighting states onto faders. Some of you, depending on what consoles you've used in the past, you might be more used to referring to that as a submaster. Okay, it's just a single lighting state on a fader. That's all it is. But let's take a look now at actually programming multiple cues onto a playback and building ourselves a little bit more of a cue stack, as it were. Okay, so let's go in and do that now. I'm going to be programming onto my master playback for this. You don't have to. You could be programming onto any of the playback faders. That's not a problem. But for this, I'm going to be programming onto my master playback and start to build up a bit of a cue stack. And of course, first things first, we need to start with creating a lighting state. So I'm going to go in, and it's not going to be award-winning lighting design by any means, but let's just go and chuck some lights up. I'm going to go and use my pre-programmed position palettes. I'm going to put those in a red. And I'm going to store that as my first cue. Okay, so I'm going to go and tap record right now. And I'm then going to go and tap my master playbacks button. And that's stored it onto my master playback down here. Let's go and make another playback. So I might want to lower these fixtures to 50%. And I'm actually going to have those, they're going to do a move to get to there. And then maybe let me take a look at what fixtures I've got to play with. Let's try a little bit of 14 and 19. A little bit of side light in there, something like that. And then let's go and move those fixtures around. Something like that. I'm going to pop a gobo in those as well. And let's chuck some new lights in there too. I'm going to go in and say a bit of 40 and 46. Go to my positions. And I'm going to tilt those out a little bit. And I'm going to pan those round. Something like that. I'm happy with that. That's going to be my Q2. So I'm going to tap record and again tap the master playback. Okay, master playback right now it's not flashing at me because there's something already stored on there. But I'm going to go and tap record and tap my master playbacks button anyway. And there we are. That is now stored in. I'm going to go this time. What should we do this time? Let's go and lose these fixtures here now. So I'm going to go and say at dot to turn those off. At dot being a shortcut for @0 enter. And I'm going to now go and record that as the next cue on my master playback. Great stuff. Now, right now, I can see playback 5 in my cue list window. So if I want to go and view my master playback, okay, I can press and hold my view button and tap the master playbacks button. And I'm now looking at the cues I've programmed in our master playback. So let's take a look at these cues. Let's play them back. So I'm going to go and double tap clear now. And then let's jump in to Q1. Let's fade into Q1. So there we are. There's our first cue on Q1. What are we seeing in our output window, first of all? Well, we're seeing our blue values. Remember, blue are intensity values coming from a cue. And then we're also seeing some grey backgrounds with a black 0 with the under the fixture values. Now, if you've been on the controlling fixtures session, you'll be familiar with what this means, and that is move on dark. That is referring to the fact that those fixtures have moved on dark for us. Now, all move on dark means is the console has automatically prepared those fixtures, prepared their colours, beams, positions, ready for when they're used later on. Now, what we can see here is that my yellow bar is automatically highlighted on Q2, meaning that is the next cue. So I'm going to go and press my go button, and that's going to fade me into my next cue. And as I faded, notice that these movers here and the movers coming in from the side as well, we didn't see the colour, well, there isn't any colour in this case, we didn't see the beams changing, we didn't see the positions changing. Okay, that's because they'd been moved on dark for us. It had been automatically prepared for us. We're seeing a new colour in here. Again, you're probably familiar with this one. Green is a value that's faded down. Okay, so it's dropped down from 100% to 50%. The little way of remembering that is blue is up towards the sky, green is dropping down towards the grass. Great, so there's our lighting state there. I'm going to tap go again. What do we see this time? Well, this cue, it just had those movers fading out. And we're now seeing some new colours as well. We're also now seeing some purple intensities. All of the fixtures that are on right now are in purple. I'm just going to rerun those cues, and you might be able to see what these fixtures are doing from Q2 to Q3. And the answer is nothing. They are at the same level that they were at in Q2. Okay, and so they're displayed in purple. A value that has not changed from the previous Q is displayed in purple. Okay, it's what we call a tracked value. The value is what we call tracked from Q2. We didn't need to tell those lights to come on; they were already on. So they've just tracked through into Q3. Happy days. So that's what those purple values are referring to. Let's go and take a little bit more of a look at our fade times. Okay, so for this I'm going to just go and program another lighting state just so we can have a really kind of simple, obvious example to have a play with delay times. I'm going to use the syntax enter enter. Really useful shortcut. If you double tap enter, that will select all fixtures that are currently on. And I'm then going to go and say an @dot. And I'm now going to go and say that I want lights 1 through 5 there. That's going to go in as Q4. So I'm just going to press record and tap its playbacks button. And then I'm going to have those fixtures off. And I'm going to have 6 through 10 on as well. And that's going to be Q5. So using this kind of really quite basic example, let's go in and I'm going to double tap clear there. We're in Q3, back to Q3. I'm now going to go into Q4, tap my go button, and we fade into our lighting state there. And I'm now going to fade into Q5, which was my lighting state there. Just a really simple crossfade from stage right to stage left. Now let's take a look at some of these fades we've got available to us. For every cue, you have an up, a down, and then a colour, beam, and position. Okay, and colour, beam, and position, that's all fairly self-explanatory. When you press your go button, that is the time it will take for your fixture to get from its current value to the programmed value. When it comes to an uptime, the uptime is the time it takes for when you press go, any lights to raise to get to the programmed level. Equally, downtime is the time it takes for any fixture to drop to get to the programmed level. What it is not, and this is something that confuses a lot of people, is the time it takes for the previous cue. Okay, that is a very confusing way of looking at it, and it's not really true. All you need to think is that when you press your go button, any lights that have to drop in intensity will use the downtime. Okay, so if I go back to Q4, we're in Q4 there. And so what I could say is okay, well, the fixtures that are going to be fading up in intensity are going to be taking 3 seconds, but they're first going to have a delay time. And if we go to our encoder wheels 2 and 4 allow you to set a up delay or a down delay. It doesn't matter which of the two you choose. Also worth mentioning as well, the first encoder wheel is simply labelled fade. So if I go in and adjust that first wheel, I'm adjusting the up and the down together, just to give us a nice crossfade. The lights that go up take the same amount of time as the lights that go down. On the fade encoders here, if you tap the middle encoder button, that will allow you to bring up an on-screen number pad. So I could go in there and say that I know this is, for example, going to be a 3.5 second fade, for example. As it happens, I am going to go and set the fade back to 3 seconds, but I am going to go in and set the up delay to be 5 seconds. So I've got D in brackets, the delay time of the up is in brackets there. I'm going to close my window there. Let's take a look at what happens. This time I'm going to go into Q5, Any lights that are fading down are going to be taking my 3 seconds, whilst those going up are delayed, and then their fade time runs through. And so we can get quite specific here on the fixtures fading up, taking different times to those fading down. So, you could be mistaken there for thinking that there were 2 queues running simultaneously. A queue that took those fixtures down, and then a queue that brought the next fixtures up. But that's all just running from one queue, but starting to get a little bit more clever with your fades up and your fade down. We have had another comment from YouTube just regarding the solution lighting console. What's the shortcut for, if remember on Flex, you can press and hold clear and tap fader function to clear out all playbacks except the master. The equivalent on solution is press and hold clear and tap memories. Just to be aware, clear and memories will do the same thing on solution. Okay, so back to fade times then. So that's our fade times there. If you've got any more questions on queue fades, please do let us know. But same logic applies there. If I were to go and click on the colour, the beam or position, again I get fade, and I can also access the delay time using the second encoder wheel there. Okay, so that's where you could, for example, get your fixtures to come up in their colour, but then actually have a delay before they then fade and move to their position. So it kind of adds a little bit of an extra element of interest of not necessarily everything running at the same time. Okay, so that is your fade times that you've got available to you. Now, as well as that, if I go and I'm just going to go and grab control of these lights and say at 50, enter. I'm now going to go and tap record. At the point of tapping record, if you take a look at your encoder wheels, you can actually also set your fade times at the point of recording. So if I know this cue is going to be, for example, a snap, I know it's going to be a 0-second fade, I can do that at the point of recording. Although the Flex console doesn't have a dedicated time button, essentially we can use our first encoder button here as your time key. Because I can just simply tap record, tap my time button, type in the time I need. I'm going to go and say 0, enter, to put my fade time in there of 0 seconds for fade. And I'm then going to go and store that cue in, and it gets stored in with my 0-second fade time. Now, notice in this cue here, just to give you an example, right now, the only change when we go into Q6 is fixtures fade down. So actually, right now, to go from Q5 to Q6, this fade time here could be a million years for all I care, because there are no fixtures fading up. When I go into this queue, it is just fixtures fading down. So it's only this fade time we care about. Okay. Equally, if I was coming out of a blackout queue, the downtime could be a million years if I wanted to, because I'm only going to have fixtures fading up from it. Okay, so that's just to give you an idea really of the up and down. As I said, we sometimes come across people getting a little bit confused about what they refer to. Arguably the most important bit of your queue list window is of course your name column. Okay, that's where you can go in and give your queues a name. Do that by double clicking on a queue, give it a name. Or a little bit more of a syntax-based approach if you're on the full-size Flex. You can use the syntax name, type the queue number that you wish to name. So I'm going to say name 3 and then tap the playback button that contains that queue. So I'm going to say name 3 and tap the master go button, and that allows me to name that queue here as well. Q3, and again another imaginative name there. Hit enter, and then that queue gets stored in with that name. Similarly, I'm now going to just go and get a blackout, so I'm going to go and do an enter at dot to say everything that's currently on, everything that's currently on, I want you to go to 0%. Enter at dot, and I'm now going to say that I want to record this. I know that it's going to have a 0-second fade time. And I also know that it's going to be called blackout. So I can now, if you're on the full-size Flex, tap name. So I can go record, I can set fade times if I wish, and then I can go and hit name. And I can now go and name that cue at the point of recording it. And there we are. It can then get stored in with its fades and with its names. So I don't need to go back in and edit that afterwards. Okay. So that's another useful thing to be aware of. Everything we've been doing so far has been working with this cue list in order. We've been programming these cues in order. I've been not telling the console a single cue number. I've just created my lighting state, tapped record, tapped the master playbacks button, and it's gone in as the next available cue. Well, what about, and I'm going to be lazy here and just say, okay, well, this lighting state that we created earlier, that I know I need this lighting state right here to be Q10. I know that I'm going to need this to be Q10 later on in my show. Well, if I want to do that, I can tap record in the usual way, but I can now literally just type in the cue number that I wish to store it as. If you're on Flex S right now, tap record, tap Z, you can then type in your cue number. And I'm now going to go and tap my master playbacks button to store that in. And that goes in now as Q10 on my master playback. Similarly, the scenario that we've all come across is we've forgotten a cue. And let's say that between, let's find a good example of this. Yeah, that's a good example. Between Q2 and 3, I just want those fixtures 40 and 46, my backlight here, I just want those on static. And so I need to insert a lighting state between 2 and 3. Well, usual programming logic applies. What I need to go and do is I need to go and grab control of my fixtures and create the lighting state that I need. So I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to go and say enter, except 40, except 46, enter. So I've gone and said everything except that one and that one at dot. And there we are. That's the lighting state that I want. I just want this lighting state here to go between Q2 and Q3. So I can go and tap record right now. And I can then say that I want this to go in as Q2.5. So I can actually literally type in there record 2.5. Now, because I'm programming my cue stack right now out of order, I do need to be careful with my tracking options, okay? Whenever you're recording or updating, which we'll do very shortly, recording or updating out of order, you do need to be aware of your tracking options. And tracking is where if you've added a fixture in, and it then just stays at the same level that it's currently at, that's what we call that tracked value. Remember, it's a purple value that we saw earlier, okay? And so if I want to make a change and I don't want that to affect any future cues, you must make sure that in your record options, you are tracking with cue only enabled. If you're using a console without an external monitor, press and hold record to open this window. It's worth mentioning what we're seeing right now, smart tag and cue only enabled. That is the default option on Flex and Flex S consoles. Okay, so if you're kind of concerned about what I've said there about affecting other cues, by default you won't need to worry because by default you are in cue only mode. Okay, but if you do want to use tracking options, just of course be careful and understand what tracking will be doing. If you want to know more on tracking, we are going to be streaming a whole dedicated session on tracking next week. And if you're watching this this not live, it's going to be somewhere. You're going to be able to get to that video somewhere on our channel. So yeah, if you want to know more about what tracking actually is, do get yourself watching that stream. It will help you out. But as I said, for now I'm going to leave this in cue only mode. I'm going to record this cue as a cue only cue. And so I've gone record 2.5, cue only is there, and I'm going to go and store that in onto my master playbacks button. And there we are. My cue gets inserted, it gets stored in. I'm going to go and double tap clear now. Q2 is then going to output again, and that means I can now go into Q2.5. There's my inserted cue. I can go into Q3, and it's back exactly how I programmed it. Okay, so that's how we can insert a cue by defining its cue number. It's worth mentioning you can record cues to 2 decimal places. So I could end up with 99 cues between 2 whole cue numbers if I wanted to. Again, you might be familiar with this already. Always go right in the middle of the 2 cues that you're inserting, because that then gives you the most amount of wiggle room either side. If I'd have gone and recorded that right there as a cue 2.01, I then wouldn't be able to insert. I'd have to go through the process of then copying it elsewhere and then deleting the original and then re-recording, so which would be a bit of a faff. Because it's worth mentioning you can't renumber an individual cue. I couldn't just literally go in and renumber this cue right now. Okay, once you record a cue, it is then set there. Okay, great stuff. So that is how we can kind of define a specific cue number further down our cue stack. And also insert a cue if we wish as well. Next thing we'll look at, I mentioned it there as well, is what about if we want to update a cue? Okay, and so let's say Q3 here, I want to update this cue. So let's make some changes to this lighting state. I'm going to go and say that I want 1 and 2 and 9 and 10. Going to go and grab control of those. Put those at full. Those guys are going to be in a blue this time, and they're going to be in that position there. It's nothing particularly incredibly looking, but it will do. It allows us to see how we can update our cues. So when we've made our tweaks, we're going to end up with a mixture of cue values and also live values, if you like, values that we've gone and done manually. So I've got a mixture of reds and blues in this case here, and of course a little bit of move on dark information in there too. And when I've gone and made those edits, I can then go and tap my update button. Again, be aware of your tracking options when you're in the update window. In this case here, I'm still in cue only, so that's fine. At the point of updating the cue, you can also use your encoder wheels to set your fade times. Okay, so you can also set fade times at the point of updating a cue if you wish to as well. And I'm then going to go in and tap my master playbacks button. So I've literally gone into the cue I want to edit, made my edits, tap update, tap your master playback button to store those in. Okay, and if I go and tap my master playbacks button, notice there those values go from red to blue, meaning they are now stored in my cue. Okay, automatically my clear button is turned off as well. You should see your clear button is automatically turned off, as essentially the console has grabbed all of those values and stored those into the cue for you. Therefore there's nothing manual still left on stage. Okay, and that's how we can update our cue. Always go into the cue you wish to update. It's always good practice. You don't have to. You could make an edit, but kind of without that cue outputting. Update it, define the cue number, and then tap your playbacks button. But it's always a good idea to go into the cue that you wish to update first. Okie dokie. Next thing that we're going to take a look at, kind of the last thing that we haven't mentioned really in our cue list window here, and that is our cue settings column on the right hand side. And let's say that cue 2.5, so this was our cue 2, remember? This was our cue 2.5. Let's say 2.5, I want that to run automatically after cue 2. Well, if we want that to happen, I'm going to go into the settings of cue 2.5. And for every cue you program, you will have these settings options available. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about some of these. First things first, down the left-hand side, we mentioned these in our fixtures session. That's where you can go and say, okay, well, these fixtures, I don't want the colour, the beam position, or effect to be prepped for this particular cue. Okay, so you can go and use those don't move options from there. But what we've also got here is the trigger. What is going to cause this cue to run on stage? And by default, you'll be pleased to hear the default of every cue is a go button press. The go button press will be required to output the cue of a cue stack. But if I go to that drop down window, I've got a few other options in there as well. I've got an auto with, or I have auto after. I've got a couple of auto options in there. Auto with the previous, that would mean that Q2 and Q2.5 run simultaneously with each other. Two different lighting states running simultaneously. Something that you might want to use that for, a really common one for that, is if you've got a lighting state, but one bunch of movers you might want to fade over 5 seconds, and another bunch of movers you might want to fade over 10. But you want both of that to start running at the same time. We could have those two separate cues with their separate timings, but both of them running together with auto with. Some lighting consoles use something called a part cue, so you can have several parts to a cue all running at once. We can just use auto with. It's just two cues running simultaneously. What I'm going to go and do is choose an auto after. What that will mean is it will wait for the previous cue's fades to complete, and then this cue will run through. So I'm going to go and say auto after. I'm actually going to go and choose a wait time in there as well. And I'm going to go and click OK. And I get auto after displayed in my cue list window. So let's go to Q1. And I'm now going to go into Q2. And Q2's fades are going to run through, my wait time counts down, and then my Q2.5 will run automatically afterwards. Okay, so that's how we can set our auto options. It's worth mentioning as well, if you're on the full-size Flex console, you've got a couple of other options in there as well. Real time and MIDI. If I go real time, I can literally put the time that I want that cue to run. I can have that cue running at 7 PM, for example. And of course, just make sure that if you are using real time, your console's clock, which is displayed here, is correct. Okay, make sure your console's clock is correct if you wish to use real time. What we've also got as well is MIDI. You can fire a MIDI timecode signal into the back of the full-size Flex console, and every single cue on your console can have a timestamp if you wish. And that means that when that time, in this case here, when that timestamp counts up to 3 seconds, this particular cue would run. Okay, because I've got that set to 3 seconds. Great stuff. I'm going to set that back to go though for now and click OK. Great stuff. So that's some of the cue settings options from in there. Next thing we'll take a look at is copying. Copying cues. So what do we got? Well, let's say, okay, well, Q2 there. I really like Q2. I want to use Q2 as Q8 later on. I'm going to need to use Q2 as Q8 later on. Okay. Well, to do that, what we can do is go ahead and tap our copy button on the console. If you're on Flex S, tap your Z button, and the copy button is within the Z menu. So I can go and tap my copy key on the console, and that will open my copy dialog. Okay. In here, I'm literally going to type 2, enter. Say I want to copy from 2 and say that I'm going to paste that in as Q8. So literally my button presses I've done there, I've done copy, 2, enter, 8, and I'm going to go and hit enter. And that's copied from Q2 to Q8. Okay, and of course, as we can see, it's copied the fade times and the name as well. And it's an exact copy there of that cue. Taking that a step further, getting a little bit more advanced, I can also copy a range of cues. So this time, again, I'm going to go and say copy. But I'm going to go and say I want to copy queues 1 through 5. So I've actually used my through button there. Copy queues 1 through 5 to Q11. So I want to copy queues 1 through to 5 to 11 and hit enter. And that has then pasted them in as queues 11 through to 15. And it's observed how they were numbered. So it's realised that 2.5 was a point queue, and therefore it's pasted that in as a 12.5 for us. Okay, so that's another useful one to be aware of. It's a way of kind of, you could copy a whole scene and paste that in later down your queue stack if you wish to. Okay. Another technique that we've got available to us is, what if we wanted to copy an individual queue here and paste it onto a playback fader in its own right? Okay. So let's say, okay, let's use this example again. Q2 right here. I really like Q2. I want to copy this and paste it onto an empty playback fader in its own right. Okay. Again, to do that, go to your copy window. And again, I'm going to say that I want to copy Q2. But now I'm going to go and say, go and tap my master playbacks button. Because what I'm saying is I want to copy Q2 of my master playback. So I've tapped my master playbacks button, and then I can go and choose where I want to paste that to. So I'm going to go and paste it onto playback 7. And there we are. So that was a process of copy, type the queue number, tap the playback button, tap where you want to paste it to. And now playback 7 is indeed an exact copy of that lighting state with fade times as well. Of course, if I wanted to go and edit the fade times of this of the queue that I've just pasted onto this fader, press and hold View, tap that playbacks button, and there we are. I can see that it's copied the name across, and it's of course copied the fade times across as well. Great stuff. So that's how we can copy individual queues. Another really useful thing you can do, I'm going to go back and view my master playback. We could copy our whole playback and paste it onto any other empty playback. Really simple process. Again, go to your copy window, and this time you can just literally go and tap on the playback buttons. So I'm going to go and click on my master playbacks button, and I'm going to go and say that I want to paste it onto playback number 8, for example. And I've now gone and copied my whole master playback. If I go and raise playback 8 right now, that's going to go and output on my stage, and I can actually use my the button underneath playback 8 as its go button. It is an exact copy, and therefore the button function has copied across as well. How do I know what queue I'm in? Well, we've got a little handy indicator in our faders window. I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger for us. In our faders window, you can see what queue you're in. Okay, so you can see the current and the next queue displayed on there. So as I run through those queues, I can see that changing. Or, of course, I can go and view that in my queue list window. So I can press and hold View and tap Playback 8's button. And I can now see Playback 8 in my queue list window as I go through those queues. Great stuff. I'm going to go back and view my master playback for now, and I'm going to go and take Playback 8's fader down. Great stuff. Any questions on any of the stuff we've done so far, please do pop any comments there, and we can get back to you. If there's anything you'd like me to go over again, I can also go over that. It's not a problem. So that's how we can copy our queues. Next thing to take a look at is, of course, deleting our queues. We can, of course, get rid of our queues if we wish to. So let's say that I wanted to get rid of Q13. Let's say I wanted to get rid of Q13. To do that, I can tap delete. If I were to right now go and tap my master playbacks button, the console is going to say, are you sure you want to delete stack? It's using that term stack, meaning all of those queues. You are going to be wiping out all of those queues at once. Okay, so no, I don't want to do that. Thank you very much. Instead, a little bit like we did with our inserting our cues, I can tap delete. If you're on Flex S, you can tap Z right now as well, and then I can type the cue that I wish to get rid of. So I can say delete 13, and then I can tap my master playbacks button. So I'm saying I want to delete cue 13 from this playback here. And then we get the pop-up, are you sure we want to delete cue 0/13? Okay, master playback is known as playback 0. So it's playback 0, cue number 13. And then you can say yes or no. I'm going to click no because I'm just going to show you as well. I could also do delete 12.5 through 14. So I'm going to type delete 12.5 through 14 from the master playback. And this time I can delete a range of cues at once. And this time, yeah, I'm going to say yes to get rid of those. Of course, if I needed those cues again, I have got the very helpful situation here where I'd made myself a backup because I'd gone and copied the whole cue stack and pasted it elsewhere. So I do have myself a backup if I were to need those again. Of course, always save to your USB sticks as well. Always make sure your show file is backed up. Great stuff. So that is also deleting our cues as well. So we looked at deleting cues, we looked at our copying cues. Now let's spend a little bit of time just talking about navigating our cue stack and the tools that we've got available to us. Well, if I go and raise my fader, we can see that our current cue is Q1 and the next cue is going to be Q2. Green row is the cue we're in, yellow row is the one we're going to be next. And I can literally go and just click on whatever cue I want to be next. I can just go and click on the cue I want to be next, it will go yellow, and my little next indicator there will also go yellow. So I can then go and tap my go button to go into that cue. If you're on the full-size Flex console, you can also use your arrow keys. So full-size Flex, I'm just using my arrow keys. I can navigate this kind of more like a spreadsheet, choose the cue I want to go into, and I can press my go button to go into that cue. Okay, because I'm running these out of order, of course I'm going to get some interesting fades running through as I do that. Another thing that we can do on the Flex console is, as you run through these cues, you'll notice that your kind of blue highlighted cell is on the cue number. And if I go and tap enter, that allows me to type into that cue number. Now, as I've already mentioned, you cannot renumber cues. So what is this doing? Well, it allows me to choose which cue is going to be next. So if I go and say enter 5, enter, that takes my next cue up to Q5 so that my next go button press will take me straight to that cue. Okay, so that's another useful one to be aware of. If you want to go straight into a cue, you can use the go to cue functionality. Okay, and for that I can press and hold my go button. And if I press and hold my go button, you can see that my command line goes to saying go to cue. So if I press and hold my go button, that will allow me to type go to cue, and I can then go and type the cue number with my other hand of the cue that I want to go into. So I'm going to say go to cue 0, release my go button, and I go to that cue. Okay, so that's a really useful type. Press a go, type the cue I want to go into, and release. And I can then go straight to that cue if I wish to. Of course, right at the start of the session, we mentioned that every playback can have a normal button function and also a shifted button function. Okay, and you might notice that the shifted button function, or by default of a cue stack, is a go snap. Shifted button function, if you've got multiple cues on a playback, is a go snap. So it allows you to go through your cues, ignoring the fade time. It just allows you to snap into your cues. Also really useful, it stops auto cues. So if you want to go into the cue prior to an auto trigger, you can snap into it, and that will prevent the auto cue from automatically running. So that is just a shift and go. Shift and go, you can snap through your cues. Okay. Now on the full-size Flex console, we have also got a pause button. We've also got a pause button next to our go button as well. So if I press my go button right now, I can then press my pause button, and I have paused my cue transitions. Okay, I've gone into my cue, and I've then pressed pause. And you see my fade progress bars here. I've got intensity, colour, beam, and position progress bars. They have literally been paused. They have been halted mid-transition. Okay. If I press my go button again, that will resume the fade. If I press pause, and I then press pause again, I can then go back. So I'm going to just keep pressing my pause button. I'm going back up my cue stack in the reverse order. Okay. A shift and pause on the full-size Flex is a snap backwards. So shift and pause is snap back in the same way that a shift and go is a go snap. Now, if you're a Flex S user right now, you're going to be thinking, well, I don't have a pause button. So what can I do about that? Well, if you really want the pause function, instead of having your shifted function as go snap, you could have your shifted function as a pause instead. So to do that, press and hold setup and tap your playbacks button, and you could then go and press and hold shift and choose pause instead, and you can then let go of your shift key. And then what you're saying is the shifted function of your go button is a pause, okay, which then gives you your pause function on Flex S as well. Because I'm emulating a Flex, I'm going to go and say my shifted function back to go snap, which is the default, and click OK. Great stuff. So that's the pause function as well, which is a useful tool to be aware of. Last function to mention when it comes to kind of navigating and running our cue stack back live is a function called speed override. Okay, a function called speed override. I'm just going to go back to Q1 there. Now, speed override can be found in your Z window. So I'm going to open my internal touchscreen. I'm going to tap my Z button, and you will see that the second encoder wheel is your speed override control. And what that allows you to do is, as you go through your cues, you can go and slow down your fade transition there. Notice I'm using my wheel here, and I can actually slow down the progress of my fades. Of course, I'm not adjusting those time in seconds. I am just slowing it down. So my progress bars are now taking much longer to run through. Equally, I could go and dial that wheel the other way, and now I am speeding up those transitions instead, so I can give those timings a little bit of a boost as I run through those cues. If you tap the middle button of that encoder wheel, it resets the speed override back to your cue timings, okay, which is just useful to be aware of. Now, when I'm running a show back, personally, I always like to have access to the speed override wheel. It allows you to boost things up, slow things down on the fly. It gives you much greater control. So rather than having to go into the Z window to access that, instead we can configure speed override to be controlled by an empty playback fader. And to do that, you can press and hold setup and tap an empty playback faders button. In my case here, I'm actually going to just navigate that using the faders window. So I'm going to go and click on playback 12. And from the advanced functions, I'm going to go and choose speed override. So these are the few extra functions that a playback fader can be. It's worth mentioning, if you're on Flex S, you do not have a dedicated Grandmaster. But if you want a dedicated Grandmaster, this is also how you can configure a playback to be one if you wish. I'm going to go and choose speed override though, as I said, and click OK. And now, essentially, my fader's kind of home, its kind of resting position is 50%. Same as that wheel is. Kind of in the wheel is kind of in that 12 o'clock position, means there's no override present. But if I go through my cues right now, I can choose to slow down using my fader or speed up using my fader those cue transitions live. And again, I can just pop that fader back to 50% if I want no override. I'm going to go to my cue list window and just show you, if you have your fader right the way at the top, or your speed override wheel fully clockwise, you have got your go snap behavior. Okay, so when speed override is right at the full, that is exactly the same as a go snap. Just means those fade times are set to 0 seconds, as quick as possible. If I go and dial that right the way the other way, I have stopped my cue stack from running. Okay, so you can stop a cue stack from running if you go and dial that bring that fader all the way down. We've had a comment in regarding the solution lighting console. Solution lighting console has a dedicated speed override pot. Okay, above the master playback fader, there is a dedicated speed override pot labeled override. That will be doing exactly the same function. Okay, so I hope that answers your question there from the person on YouTube. Okay, so that is speed override, a really useful tool. As I said, personally, if I'm running a theatre show, I will always like to have one of those faders set to speed override so I can really quickly grab control of those times kind of on the fly. Kind of a prime example of that, in fact, this is probably quite a good example here, is if you're cross-fading between kind of Q4 and 5 in my case. I'm just going to go and get rid of my delay time. If you're crossfading between kind of a stage right, stage left kind of crossover, you might find that it's really useful to kind of, as you crossfade, you can slow that progress down or speed it up as you crossfade from stage left to stage right. So that is a really useful tool to be aware of. That is your speed override function. Great stuff. Any other questions, do please keep those coming. I'm going to go and delete my speed override control. To do that, go and tap delete, and then I can click its button just like a normal playback. And I'm going to go and say yes. And of course, if I wanted to go and reconfigure that, go into the settings of another empty playback fader. Next thing that I want to talk about, is kind of flex only. Okay, there's some flex only features, so if you're on Flex S, these won't be applicable to you. But on Flex, we've got some very useful buttons here along the top of our output window that are definitely worth mentioning. First couple of options is intensities or source. I can choose what value is displayed under my fixture number. So rather than having it displaying my intensities, I can have it saying the source, and that will give me a little code of where that light is coming from. It's kind of that scenario of why on earth is that light on stage? Go to source, oh yeah, I've left that playback up. And as I run through, you can see, okay, well, I'm now seeing 0/2, remember 0 being the master playback, 2 being cue number 2. And I can just run through that now. Notice I'm in Q2.5, but these fixtures are still coming on from Q2, because they have tracked from Q2. And you can just run through. If I go and fire a UDK right now, a user definable key, I get UDK displayed, indicating that those fixtures are coming from a UDK. So really useful annotation, having your source option there. I'm going to set that back to intensities. And the next option to talk about at the top of your output window are these next few options here. At the moment, we are in live. Okay, we're at the moment in live mode, meaning the intensity values we see in here are the values being output to our fixtures. But instead, I could go and choose preview. And I now get a preview of whatever cue is set to be next in my cue list window. So if I go and click on a different cue, I'm getting a really nice preview in here. I can actually go scroll down in my parameter table and see all of the various levels of each parameter of my fixtures. But really importantly, I can also just see the intensities, and I can just go and, as I flick through my next cue, I can go and see what cue I wish to be next. Equally, I can still run through my cues live right now using my go button. That's not a problem. Okay, I can just continue to run through those cues live. But right now, because I'm in preview, my yellow bar is actually the data that I'm seeing in there. So I can go back to live and it will then show me those values that are live on stage. The next option along is blind. And if you go into blind, that takes your console into blind mode. If you're on Flex, the shortcut for blind mode is a Shift and Z. If you do Shift Z, that is the shortcut to take you from live to blind. Now I'm in blind mode, I can start to control my fixtures without data being sent to them. So let's say that I wanted, for example, I wanted to record a lighting state onto a fader without my audience knowing. Well, I'm in blind mode right now, and I'm going to go and say that I want lights fixtures 1 through 10 homed, and I can see all of that data right now in my blind programmer, but my audience do not know that that's happening. Okay, and I'm going to go and say that I want those in downstage position, and I'm going to want them in a blue. All of this happening blind. My audience doesn't know this is happening. And I'm now going to go and tap record, and I'm going to go and store that onto playback number 9. Store that in. Great stuff. And so now I'm just going to tap clear to clear my selection. I could lower my master playbacks fader, and I could then raise that fader that I've just programmed, and I've been able to program that in blind without my audience knowing, and I've then got a fader that I can access for those lights. Now, where blind really comes into its own is the option to load in a cue into blind mode. So we're still in blind right now. And what I can do is, let's say that I'm running my cue stack right now, I'm running through my cues, but I know I need to edit Q5. I know that Q5 is coming up and I need to make an edit to it. Well, when I'm in blind mode, what you can do is press and hold your go button, load cue is written in your command line, and you can then release your go button. Nothing's happened on stage, but I have loaded Q5, and I can see that from the top of my output window up here. I have loaded Q5 into my blind programmer, and I can see all of the values of Q5 right now. And let's say that I know I need... what should we say? Let's make something. Let's do something really obvious. I'm going to say that I want to get rid of light 7 and 9 are going to be at dot for this cue, and I know that light 8 is going to be in a yellow, like that. And when I've made my edits in my blind programmer, I can literally go ahead and tap my update button. And if I tap update, those changes are saved into that cue I was working on. If I want to go back and edit another cue, jump back into blind mode, load in another cue if you want to. And all the while you're in blind mode, of course, you can still be running through your cues. Okay, I'm going to tap Z to leave blind, just go back to live, and we can see that once I get to Q5 now shows my edited lighting state. So I was able to load that into blind, edit that lighting state, and I'm now able to play it back. Okay, so that is blind mode as well. Again, as I said, blind and preview and source are not available on Flex S, but really useful tools when you're on Flex. Really useful to kind of get a little bit more information in front of you without having to actually see your lighting states on stage. Great stuff, and that is everything that I had on my list that I wanted to go over. That is our programming cues onto playback session. So we've gone through programming cues onto playbacks. We've looked at the settings. We've looked at all of the various options that we've got available to us when it comes to our cues. And we've also taken a look at some really crucial tools available to us, such as the extra tools that are available when it comes to kind of playing back our cues in a more live scenario. Okay, I hope you found that. I hope you found that useful. If there are any kind of last minute questions, do please pop them in and I'll be able to answer those. If there's any questions that come to mind kind of after watching this and you think, oh, I wish I'd asked that, do drop us an email. Send us an email to support@zero88.com and we'll be able to get back to you on that one. Okay, thanks very much for your company. As I said, I hope you found that useful. We will be streaming some more sessions next week. And if you are watching this on playback on YouTube, for example, after the session has finished streaming, check out some of the other videos that we've also got available to us. So thank you very much for your company. Hope you found that useful. Any questions at all, do please let us know. Thanks very much, everyone. Take care. Bye bye.